In the coastal town of Havenbrook, Maine, there exists a festival that the townspeople celebrate with unusual fervor every 4 years. But what they don't tell visitors is that for the past 28 years, without exception, exactly one person has vanished during these celebrations. Always a stranger, always without a trace, always during the leap year festival. Before we dive into the chilling truth behind Havenbrook's most guarded secret, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our darkest mysteries. Tell us in the comments what city and country you're listening from. We love hearing from our international audience of mystery lovers. And if this story sends chills down your spine, give it a like to help us bring you more of these forgotten tales. Now, let me take you back to 1876, when one man's curiosity would uncover a conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. According to the fragmentary records and whispered stories that have survived from that time, the truth about Havenbrook's festival was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Havenbrook in 1876 was a modest fishing community of roughly 800 souls, nestled along the rocky coastline of Maine, about 40 miles north of Portland. The town had been founded in 1848 by a group of fishermen seeking refuge from the economic hardships that had plagued the larger coastal cities. With its natural harbor and proximity to rich fishing grounds, Havenbrook had grown into a prosperous, if insular, community. The town's main street stretched for less than half a mile, lined with weathered, clapboard houses, the mandatory general store, a small church, and the town hall, a modest brick building that also housed the municipal records office. The harbor was the heart of the community, where fishing boats bobbed alongside the larger vessels of the Northeastern Maritime Company, a Boston-based firm that had established a processing facility in Havenbrook in 1850. Thomas Moorhead had served as Havenbrook's town clerk and registrar for 6 years by 1876. A meticulous man in his early 30s with prematurely graying hair and wire-rimmed spectacles, Thomas had moved to Havenbrook from Boston after completing his studies in municipal administration. He was known for his methodical approach to record-keeping and his quiet, scholarly demeanor that made him somewhat of an outsider in the close-knit fishing community. The Leap Year Festival, as it had come to be known, was supposedly a celebration of the town's founding. Every 4 years, coinciding with leap years, the townspeople would organize a 3-day festival featuring traditional Maine foods, folk music, and various competitions. Visitors from neighboring towns would arrive for the festivities, drawn by the promise of authentic coastal culture and the famous Havenbrook lobster rolls. What made Thomas particularly valuable to the community was his attention to detail. Unlike his predecessor, who had kept sparse and often illegible records, Thomas maintained comprehensive documentation of every birth, death, marriage, and significant event in Havenbrook. It was this very thoroughness that would lead him to discover the town's darkest secret. The 1876 festival began on Friday, September 15th, with the arrival of nearly 60 visitors from surrounding towns. Thomas had spent weeks preparing for the increased administrative workload, organizing temporary lodging arrangements, and ensuring all festival permits were properly filed. The weather was unusually mild for mid-September, with clear skies and gentle ocean breezes that seemed to promise a perfect celebration. Among the visitors was a young traveling salesman named Edmund Hartwell from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Hartwell, a well-dressed man in his late 20s with a friendly demeanor, had arrived on Thursday evening and taken a room at the Seahawk Inn, Havenbrook's only boarding house. He carried samples of modern fishing equipment and had spent Friday morning demonstrating his wares to several local fishermen. The festival's first day proceeded without incident, the town square filled with the sounds of fiddle music and the aroma of fresh seafood. Thomas observed the festivities from his office window, noting the genuine enthusiasm of both locals and visitors. He had always found it curious how the townspeople seemed to invest so much energy in this particular celebration, far more than in their annual harvest festival or even Christmas gatherings. Saturday morning brought a light fog that hung over the harbor like a gray shroud. Thomas arrived at his office early, as was his habit, to find Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood waiting for him. Mrs. Blackwood, the elderly owner of the Seahawk Inn, appeared unusually agitated. Her normally composed demeanor was replaced by nervous fidgeting and rapid speech. "Mr. Moorhead," she said, wringing her hands, "I need to report that Mr. Hartwell didn't return to his room last night. His belongings are still there, but his bed wasn't slept in. I thought perhaps he had found other accommodations, but no one has seen him since yesterday evening." Thomas dutifully recorded the report, but something about Mrs. Blackwood's manner struck him as odd. Her concern seemed performative, as if she were fulfilling an obligation rather than expressing genuine worry. When he suggested they organize a search party, she quickly dismissed the idea, claiming that visitors often changed their plans without notice. By Sunday evening, Edmund Hartwell had still not appeared. Thomas made inquiries throughout the town, but received only vague responses. People claimed to have seen Hartwell at various points during Saturday's festivities, but no one could provide specific details about his whereabouts after sunset. The festival concluded without any organized effort to locate the missing man. In the weeks following the festival, Thomas found himself unable to shake his unease about Hartwell's disappearance. The official response had been surprisingly casual for a community that prided itself on looking after visitors. Even more puzzling was how quickly the townspeople seemed to forget about the incident entirely. When Thomas mentioned Hartwell in conversations, people would offer polite but brief responses before changing the subject. Driven by professional curiosity and a growing sense that something was amiss, Thomas began examining the town's historical records more carefully. What he discovered in the dusty filing cabinets and leather-bound ledgers would forever change his understanding of Havenbrook. The pattern emerged slowly as Thomas cross-referenced visitor registrations with incident reports and newspaper clippings. In 1872, during the previous leap year festival, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Connolly from Bangor had vanished on the second night of the celebration. The circumstances were remarkably similar to Hartwell's disappearance, last seen during the evening festivities. Belongings left behind, no organized search effort. Going back further, Thomas found records of Marcus Webb, a young logger from Vermont, who had disappeared during the 1868 festival. Before that, in 1864, it was Catherine Morrison, a widow from New Hampshire, who had come to visit distant relatives. And in 1860, James Fletcher, a merchant from Massachusetts. The pattern was undeniable. Every 4 years during the leap year festival, exactly one visitor would vanish without a trace. Always someone from outside the community. Always during the second night of the celebration. Always with the same casual response from the townspeople. But it was the discovery of the town's founding records that revealed the most disturbing truth. Thomas had always assumed the festival celebrated Havenbrook's establishment in 1848, but the actual founding date was March 3rd, 1848. The first festival had been held not in March, but in September of that same year, 1848 being a leap year. The original festival had been organized by the town's founding council, which included several prominent families whose descendants still held positions of influence in 1876. According to the meeting minutes, the festival had been designed to ensure the continued prosperity of our community through the maintenance of our covenant with the Northeastern Maritime Company. Thomas's investigation intensified as he began to piece together the economic history of Havenbrook. The Northeastern Maritime Company's processing facility had been built in 1850, 2 years after the town's founding, but the company's involvement with Havenbrook dated back to the very beginning. In fact, the company had provided the initial funding for the town's establishment and had guaranteed to purchase all of the community's fishing output at above-market prices. This arrangement had been formalized in a contract dated September 1848. The same month as the first festival. The contract was unusual in its terms, specifying not just economic obligations but also certain community commitments that were referenced but not explicitly detailed in the available documents. Thomas discovered that the contract was renewed every 4 years, always coinciding with leap years. Each renewal was celebrated with the festival, and each renewal required the signatures of the town's leading citizens. But there were always fewer signatures on the renewal documents than on the original contract, suggesting that some signatories had left the community or were otherwise no longer available. The economic benefits of this arrangement were substantial. Havenbrook's fishermen enjoyed guaranteed prices that were typically 20 to 30% higher than those offered in other Maine fishing towns. The Northeastern Maritime Company also provided modern equipment, maintained the harbor facilities, and offered no-interest loans to local fishermen for boat purchases and repairs. But Thomas began to notice disturbing patterns in the town's population records. While Havenbrook had grown steadily since its founding, there was a notable absence of certain families who had been prominent in the early years. The Hendersons, the Clarks, the Whitneys, all families mentioned in early town records but absent from more recent documentation. When Thomas discreetly inquired about these families, he received evasive responses. People would claim the families had moved away, but there were no records of property sales or forwarding addresses. It was as if these families had simply vanished from the community's collective memory. The breakthrough came when Thomas discovered a personal diary hidden in the back of a filing cabinet. The diary belonged to Samuel Whitmore, one of Havenbrook's founding council members, and covered the period from 1848 to 1852. Whitmore's entries grew increasingly disturbed as he described what he called the terrible necessity that had been imposed upon the community. According to Whitmore's account, the Northeastern Maritime Company had indeed provided crucial financial support to establish Havenbrook, but the true cost of this support had been concealed from most residents. The company's representative, a man named Cornelius Blackwood, had made it clear that the favorable contract terms came with specific obligations that went beyond simple commercial arrangements. The diary entries became more cryptic as Whitmore described meetings held in secret, decisions made by a small group of town leaders, and the gradual realization that they had entered into an agreement that would haunt the community for generations. Whitmore wrote of his growing horror as he understood the true nature of what he called the selection process. But the diary entries ended abruptly in 1852, with Whitmore's final entry expressing his intention to expose the truth about what we have done. Thomas found no record of Samuel Whitmore after that date, despite the fact that he had been one of the town's most prominent citizens. The implications were becoming clear, but Thomas needed concrete evidence. He began spending his evenings in the town hall, carefully examining every document he could find. It was during one of these late-night sessions that he discovered the true contract between Havenbrook and the Northeastern Maritime Company. Hidden in a sealed envelope behind a loose board in the filing cabinet, Thomas found the complete contract signed in 1848. The document was far more extensive than the abbreviated version kept in the public records. Section 7 of the contract, titled Community Obligations, spelled out the horrifying truth in clinical legal language. The contract required the town to provide what it termed satisfactory resolution of excess population concerns every 4 years. This was to be accomplished through the consensual removal of a designated individual, preferably an outsider, during the community celebration. The removed individual would be relocated to serve the company's interests in other capacities. But Thomas's blood ran cold as he read the final clause of Section 7. Should the community fail to fulfill this obligation, the Northeastern Maritime Company reserves the right to select individuals from among the permanent residents of Havenbrook for relocation purposes. The contract was signed by 12 town leaders, including all the families that had mysteriously disappeared from Havenbrook's records over the years. Thomas realized that those who had attempted to break the agreement or expose the truth had themselves become victims of the company's relocation program. As Thomas studied the contract by lamplight, he heard footsteps in the corridor outside his office. It was well past midnight, and the town hall should have been empty. The footsteps stopped directly outside his door, and Thomas could see the shadow of someone standing there. He quickly hid the contract and extinguished his lamp, sitting in darkness as he listened to the slow, deliberate footsteps continue down the hall. The next morning brought the arrival of a stranger in town, a well-dressed man who introduced himself as Mr. Aldrich from the Northeastern Maritime Company. Aldrich's visit was supposedly routine, a periodic inspection of the company's facilities, but Thomas noticed how the town's leading citizens treated him with a mixture of deference and fear. Thomas observed from his office window as Aldrich met with Mayor Cornelius Blackwood Jr., the son of the company representative who had negotiated the original contract. The meeting lasted for over an hour, and Thomas could see the mayor's increasingly agitated gestures through the window of his office across the street. That afternoon, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He approached Dr. Marcus Fleming, the town's physician, whom he had always considered to be one of the more reasonable community leaders. Dr. Fleming was an educated man who had arrived in Havenbrook in 1851 after the original contract was signed, and Thomas hoped he might be an ally in exposing the truth. Dr. Fleming listened to Thomas's discoveries with growing alarm. When Thomas showed him the complete contract, the physician's face went pale. "Dear God," Fleming whispered, "I knew there was something wrong with this place, but I never imagined. How many people have we?" Fleming revealed that he had been required to sign death certificates for the missing visitors, listing them as drowning victims whose bodies had been swept out to sea. The certificates were backdated and filed with the state authorities, officially closing the cases. He had been told this was necessary to protect the town's reputation and ensure continued tourism. But Fleming's revelation came with a warning. "Thomas," he said urgently, "you must understand that we are all complicit in this. Every adult in this town knows what happens during the festivals. We tell ourselves it's necessary for our survival, that the company would destroy us if we refused. But the truth is, we've become dependent on their money, and we've convinced ourselves that sacrificing strangers is acceptable if it protects our families." Fleming explained that the selection process involved drugging the chosen victim during the festival's second night, then transporting them to a company ship that waited offshore. The victims were reportedly taken to company facilities in the Caribbean, where they were forced to work in conditions that amounted to slavery. "None of them ever return," Fleming said quietly. "I doubt any of them survive very long. The conspiracy involved virtually every adult in the community. The festival was deliberately organized to attract visitors, providing a pool of potential victims. The selection was made by a committee of town leaders based on criteria that favored individuals who were traveling alone, had no strong family connections, and would be unlikely to be missed immediately. Thomas realized that his investigation had not gone unnoticed. The footsteps he had heard the previous night, Aldrich's sudden visit, the nervous behavior of the townspeople, all signs that his discovery was known. Fleming confirmed his fears. "They know what you found, Thomas. Blackwood is meeting with the selection committee tonight. You need to leave Havenbrook immediately." That night, Thomas gathered the evidence he had collected and prepared to flee Havenbrook. But as he made his way to the livery stable to hire a horse, he found his path blocked by Mayor Blackwood and 3 other men. "Going somewhere, Mr. Moorhead?" Blackwood asked with a cold smile. Thomas was taken to the town hall, where he found the selection committee assembled, the same group of families who had controlled Havenbrook since its founding. Mr. Aldrich sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents with the detached efficiency of a business transaction. "Mr. Moorhead," Aldrich said without looking up, "your curiosity has created a problem for our arrangement. The contract is quite clear about what happens to those who threaten our mutual interests." But Thomas had prepared for this possibility. Before leaving his office, he had written a detailed letter describing everything he had discovered, and had given it to Dr. Fleming with instructions to mail it to the Portland newspaper if Thomas failed to return by morning. He had also hidden copies of the contract and other evidence in multiple locations. The revelation that the evidence could be exposed publicly created a crisis for the conspiracy. Aldrich and the town leaders huddled in urgent consultation while Thomas waited under guard. Finally, Aldrich announced their decision. The current arrangement is no longer sustainable. The company is terminating its contract with Havenbrook, effective immediately. The economic implications were devastating. Without the company's guaranteed purchases and financial support, Havenbrook would face immediate economic collapse. The town's fishing industry, which had become dependent on the company's modern equipment and processing facilities, would be unable to compete in the open market. Thomas was released with a warning to keep silent about what he had discovered, but the damage was done. Within 6 months, the Northeastern Maritime Company had closed its Havenbrook facility and withdrawn its support. The town's population began to decline as families left to seek opportunities elsewhere. Dr. Fleming, racked with guilt over his complicity, provided Thomas with additional details about the fate of the missing visitors. According to Fleming, at least 7 people had been relocated over the years, and Fleming believed none had survived their forced labor. The weight of this knowledge, combined with the economic destruction of the community, drove Fleming to take his own life in the spring of 1877. Thomas remained in Havenbrook long enough to document the town's decline and ensure that the evidence of the conspiracy was preserved. He eventually moved to Portland, where he spent the rest of his career working to reform municipal record-keeping systems and prevent similar abuses. Havenbrook never fully recovered from the loss of the company's support. The town's population dwindled to fewer than 200 residents by 1880, and the Leap Year Festival was never held again. The remaining townspeople lived with the knowledge of what they had done, and many families left rather than face the constant reminder of their complicity. The case of Havenbrook serves as a chilling reminder of how economic desperation can lead entire communities to commit unthinkable acts. It also demonstrates the importance of maintaining independent oversight of local government and the dangers of allowing any organization to gain too much control over a community's survival. What happened in Havenbrook shows us that the greatest monsters are often not supernatural beings, but ordinary people who convince themselves that terrible acts are necessary for their survival. The true horror lies not in what happened to the victims, but in how an entire community became complicit in their disappearance. What do you think about this story? Do you believe that economic necessity can justify such extreme measures? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dark tale of community conspiracy, make sure to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more mysteries that reveal the darker side of human nature. Share this video with someone who appreciates true stories of historical intrigue. Until next time, remember that the most terrifying secrets are often hidden in plain sight.